Talk to me about how you got into learning about body language, knowing about body language. Give me a little bit of that foundation first.
Well, my expertise was in the area of verbal communications, and I was doing that in an advertising and marketing firm where we were setting up how do you persuade in that sense on behalf of corporations and hospitals or whatever. And I got exposed to the nonverbal communications through one of the experts I heard speak, and so I started studying it. So I took about 5 years of studying that with experts, and it struck me that there was one person I really wanted to work with, and that was the former special agent that actually trained the FBI on nonverbal behavior. His name is Joe Navarro. So I reached out to him, and it turned out that he was willing to take me on to work with me one-on-one. We worked together for close to 3 years. And at the end of that, he gave me a master certification in body language and nonverbal behavior. So, yeah.
What fascinates you and what is interesting to you about nonverbal communication compared to what we're doing right now, verbal communication?
Yeah, well, both are important. However, when you see a disconnect between what's said and what's shown, you should believe what's shown, because it's very easy for people to manipulate their words. And sometimes it's not necessarily an unethical thing. It's something where they don't want to have any kind of fight with you, or they're trying to please you or tell you what you want to hear. So sometimes people will just say things that they're trying to be nice about it, but it's not what they really feel. And so what happens is the unconscious leaks what the true feeling is. And most people are not very aware of those leaks.
Interesting. So I'm guessing with sports, obviously, when these are people who speak to the media, if not weekly, daily, I'm guessing you have a wide range of just video and things to study when it comes to this in sports, right?
Yeah, and I love looking at sports because people are highly emotionally charged. And so you're going to see a lot of those leaks, especially when someone just had a big loss, or whether somebody had a big win, or there's some kind of controversy going on.
So with the most recent news, obviously, with Luka Doncic going to the Lakers, we have a couple press conferences you've looked at, and I'd love to hear some of your insight into both of those and what you noticed.
Yeah, with him in particular, there was a real sadness. He looked very down, and we see that in his posture. We see that he sort of collapsed down, and also in some cases he even has his head hanging down. And what you really want to do in nonverbals is make sure you understand what someone's normal baseline is. If that was his normal baseline, there would be nothing that would be unusual about that. But I looked at interviews he's had in other circumstances, and I didn't see that. So that's how we know there's a change, and the change then can be attributed to the emotional shift. And he has verbally said this was very hurtful to him and a real shock to him. So really his nonverbals and his verbals about that are aligned.
Now compare that to what we saw with the coach and Nico Harrison-Jason Kidd, their initial press conference the day before, or a couple days before. What did you notice there?
So in the Jason Kidd interview, particularly at the beginning, we see a frequency of stress signals, and we don't see that in other interviews with him. So he was doing things like hand on face, hand covering mouth, hand ventilating his collar, which what happens is we get hot when we're feeling stressed, so that happens. And then a full hand on the neck at one point, and that really is relatively rare unless somebody's under high stress. And there was one other signal that a lot of people might miss because it's subtle, and that's where he had his tongue rubbing the inside of the cheek, so the cheek was poking out.
And then also Smooth, like he was such a great guy in the locker room. So I just want to thank all those guys for their contribution to get us to where we're at.
And that's also a way that the unconscious is trying to calm him down.
Yeah, there was another one you mentioned with Luka. Tell me again, related to a little shoulder shrug that you mentioned a lot of people might not have seen. Tell me what you saw there.
Yeah, the key is we're looking at what's being said verbally and what's being shown non-verbally. And at that time, he was saying how he's really excited about the move. And when he says that, he shows a shoulder shrug.
I don't think there's ever been so many people in my press conference, so I really appreciate all the support, and the most importantly, the fans. They always supported me, and it was an amazing journey, and I'm just excited, just to learn everything, and now I get to play with him. So it's an amazing feeling. It was really hard moments for me, especially the first day. But as I said, I get to play in the greatest club in the world, and I'm excited for this new journey. It's a really big thing for me. But really, I'm really excited to be here.
And that's saying that the unconscious is saying, I'm not so sure about this. So that's another case of when you see a disconnect between what's said and what's shown, believe what's shown.
How about the jersey hold too?
Yeah, great point. So when he was holding up the LA jersey, it was so low that the reporters in front of him actually blocked the view. And if you look at most players when they join a team, even senior players that are coming over that are already experienced, not just the kids out of college,
sure,
they're carrying it up here, not down by your waist. And that, I think, is a subtle, unconscious thing that I'm not real excited about this.
Yeah. And what did you know? Was there anything you noticed with of the people that have been a part of these press conferences? Rob Pelinka, who was next to him, the general manager of the Lakers.
Yeah.
What were you able to kind of notice from that?
Well, he was showing, high confidence as he was talking about it, and he feels very good about what's happening and that this is going to be a great outcome. But we also saw some stress signals with him. So there was something that was happening that we actually call kind of a cleanse. He had his full hand on his thigh, and you'll notice he was rubbing that. And that, again, is the unconscious saying, I need to get rid of the stress I'm feeling. And so it uses that repetitive behavior to kind of release some of that energy. Well, I did think that, and again, I always look for changes in behavior. And we saw that with Luka when he was talking about, he was on the podcast. He really does like the coach over in LA, and they have, a history of getting together and stuff. And he says he never does podcasts, but he's done 2 for that guy. He actually had a smile on his face when he was talking about that.
You, in a podcast with JJ years ago, said that the one NBA player that you watched was LeBron James.
And when he was talking about the players calling him and telling him that, they were glad he was coming on board and that kind of thing, he did get a smile there. But boy, it was very short and very short. It was there and it was disappeared.
Sure. What about the posture? Because you said, as a lot of people know who have seen Luka pressers, he doesn't always have the best posture in general.
Yeah.
But even you were saying there were even moments where it seemed even a little worse than normal.
Yeah, I would say that generally speaking, he's not somebody who kind of sits up straight, as we all should, but most of us don't, right? And he generally doesn't, because I looked again at other interviews, but I've never seen him with his head hung low, and here he did do that. So I think that's a difference. That's not his norm. So I think it's significant. It was almost like he's in mourning. And I think if you look at what he said verbally, both in his letter to Dallas and what he said in other interviews about his feelings on it, I think we get that he is in mourning. He really considered Dallas his home, and he feels really sad about a forced move, which he had no say in, and it came as a big shock to him.
So it sounds like from what you've shared, between Jason Kidd and Nico Harrison and Rob Pelinka and Luka Doncic, the person who sounded most sure of themselves through their nonverbal language was Nico Harrison?
Yeah, I'd say...
Him or Rob Pelinka?
Yeah, the 2 general managers who made the deal without anybody else being involved, they both feel good about the deal. I did not see that level of comfort and confidence coming from Jason Kidd, and certainly I did not see it from Luka. So I think that there's also probably hurt feelings about not being consulted. And I think that's hard. And then one other piece of this is the psychology piece. And that deals in what influences decisions. So it's interesting, both general managers told stories by which they didn't initiate it, but the other guy did. Did you pick that up? So one of them said, they were mentioning it, would I, should I? And the other guy said, when he brought the deal to me, so it's really interesting that neither of them want to take responsibility for initiating it. But we do know that they both said this is going to be just between us, not the owners, not the players, not the coaches or anybody else. So they feel good about it because it was their deal and they both came away with something that they felt satisfied with. But for the other people, it's kind of hurtful. And really Luka even mentions how loyalty is a big deal for him. So he felt that he had that for the Mavericks, and he felt, I think, from what I heard, a hurt that he felt betrayed from that loyalty.
Sure. And maybe this ties into body language, or maybe it doesn't, but is there anything to glean from the fact that Pelinka and Luka, there are only two people on this stage? Sometimes in these pressers you bring the coach on too, sometimes you don't, but this one they kind of decide it's just a two-man thing, we're going to go up there and talk, and then Redick was in some of the photos afterwards, but they didn't bring the coach up to give his 2 cents. Anything to glean from that?
Yeah. I think that there was a feeling that he was not in the circle, right? So they were respectful in talking about him, but for whatever reason, they didn't see him as part of the key discussion and interview. And I don't know that anybody wanted to do these interviews. Because they knew it was highly controversial. Obviously, I think it's being received way more positively on the LA side than the Dallas side. The probably most popular player currently for the Dallas team is now not there. So it's put a shockwave for the fan base.
Now, you made me think of one other thing in talking about where Pelinka brought up some things, connecting Redick and bringing him up. There was a moment when Harrison brought up talking to Kidd or not talking to Kidd.
But J. Kidd and I are aligned, and we talk about archetypes, and we talk about the culture that we want to create. So I know the type of players that he likes without actually talking to him. Hey, would you like, so I know that. And J. Kidd coached them when they won a championship. So I think when you're aligned with your coach like that, I know the type of players that he likes. And so I felt good about it making sense to where we're trying to go.
Share with me again, what did you notice in that moment of Nico talking about Kidd?
Yeah, so it was really interesting because he was saying that he didn't talk to Kidd about it, he didn't know it, and he said, because I know what he likes in players and I can just do these things I can anticipate without him. So if there was agreement by Kidd on that, you would expect him to have a little nod as the coach, as the general manager is talking, right? But he didn't. He was stone-faced. He didn't move an inch. Nothing moved on his face, not his lips, not his eye. I don't even think he blinked. He just, it's like that. So it was really almost like a deer in the headlight type of thing of not wanting to acknowledge that from both a conscious and unconscious level.
What this kind of, what it tells me is, a lot of people just felt like this both of these press conferences, something feels off, right? Maybe they can't point to why it does, but did you feel the general mood of Mavs fans and even people in the newsroom, like, this is just weird, he seemed off. And what you're providing kind of in a way is like, here's tangible physical things that I've noticed and you're kind of dissecting to, I guess, validate the feeling everyone kind of has just naturally. Is that kind of like a way to look at it, where a lot of people probably felt the way that you're describing some of these things, they just didn't know why or kind of how, and you're kind of breaking that down for us a little bit better, right?
Well, as a survival skill, our unconscious, everyone, whether you're trained or not in body language, is getting an impression. And usually it's right. We may not be able to pinpoint, oh, he had his tongue in his cheek or something. But what they do have is, that didn't feel right. Or somehow, I don't believe that he believes what he just said. Or, boy, that person seems uncomfortable. And anybody can be trained in this. But we naturally, if we'll listen to our instincts, pick up that something was off. And it's because most of us have seen, especially if it's somebody who's in the news a lot, we've seen them a lot, so we have a normal baseline for them, and we're seeing that doesn't feel normal to me.
Yeah.
You know, you look at what is the psychology behind doing this without the owners knowing, without the coaches knowing, without even having even one conversation with the player. And it comes out of something that we call in the persuasive psychology arena, it's called scarcity. And one of the things that we did hear from Nico was that, look, time was running out, and we were getting close to a time where Luka could make the decision. So there, I think what happened is it pressed them to make a deal, and there are many people who don't think it's the best deal, certainly for the Mavs, on what they gained from this exchange. But it sounds like what was happening on the general manager side is really not having that same sense of trust and loyalty that Luka had. And obviously we've seen in the past where somebody like Dirk, who was in a similar position, was willing to say, hey, look, I will take a cut so that we can have better team people, you know, with me here. And they never gave Luka that chance. And I really do think that is where the hurt comes, because he never had even an inkling that this is where it was going. But I think what was driving Nico's decision is, we got to move before he does. So that's unfortunate.
Let me ask you something about persuasion. You bring up the word persuasion. What do you think? One thing that I've seen a lot of people bring up is the way that this now was handled, not bringing it up to Luka, not giving him the chance. Feels like there's a good chance that that's going to make it hard to persuade the next free agent that wants to come to Dallas, because then it's like, well, how do I know you're not going to treat me the same way when you're making a business decision? Then I'm not even brought into the conversation like the last superstar was here. Feels like that's going to make it hard for Nico Harrison to persuade the next guy to come to town.
Well, and one of the things that Luka said is he got a lot of phone calls from players like Steph Curry and all these guys who said that to him, that, you know, man, it's like none of us have any say in this anymore. And it really, I think the way this was handled created a real sense of distrust between players and general managers.